As the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey of the coronation ceremony, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
The palace had endured scandals, cold wars, and whispered betrayals before, but this was not one of those stories that moved quietly through private corridors until someone leaked a polished version to the press. This happened in front of Catherine. It happened in front of her youngest child. And to William, it felt like something far more personal than palace tension. By evening, one sentence was spreading through the household with dangerous speed. Camilla had gone too far. Before we go deeper into what this moment could mean for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next update. Catherine noticed Louis look down before anyone else seemed to understand what had happened. She stepped toward him immediately, placing a steady hand on his shoulder with the instinctive urgency only a mother has. The private gathering at Windsor had been arranged to discuss upcoming royal appearances. These were the carefully managed public moments where senior royals stand together to project stability, unity, and continuity. Charles wanted calm, William wanted control, Camilla wanted the children to understand the expectations attached to the family name. But Louis was still a child, and when the queen consort sharply corrected him in front of everyone, the atmosphere shifted so suddenly that even the aides appeared frozen. William did not react immediately. He watched his son stiffen. He watched Catherine lean closer to him. He watched Camilla remain upright and composed, as though what she had said was nothing more than necessary discipline. But William's silence was not surrender. It was a warning. Everyone in that room knew there was a difference between royal restraint and royal anger. And what moved across William's face was not simple anger. It was colder than that. Charles looked from Camilla to William, and for one painful moment, the king appeared trapped between devotion and what he knew was right. Camilla tried to soften the damage. She said Louis needed to learn control. She spoke with the firmness of someone who believed her position allowed her to correct the room. But Catherine answered with a voice that shook just enough to make everyone listen. She said Louis had been humiliated in front of adults who should have protected him, not judged him. The words were not loud, they were worse than loud, they were precise. Then William stood. The scrape of the chair across the floor cut through the room. Charles looked up sharply. Camilla's expression tightened, but William had already moved beyond ordinary caution. He looked at Louis. Then he looked at Catherine, and in that instant, something in him became certain. This was no longer about manners. This was about the boundary around his family. William turned to Camilla and spoke the words that changed the room. Not him, not in front of her, not ever again. But to understand why this single confrontation shook the palace so violently, we have to look at the people standing inside that room, and the private wounds they were carrying long before Louis became the center of the storm. Every royal crisis may appear in public, but it begins in private. Behind the titles were people already carrying pressure, resentment, fear, pride, and old pain. Catherine was protecting her children with quiet intensity. William was trying to balance being a son, a husband, a father, and a future king. Camilla was fighting for authority in a family that had never completely accepted her. And Charles was standing between them all, exhausted by the cost of choosing sides. William had carried the pressure before he ever entered that room. He understood that every fracture inside the family would eventually become his responsibility. The future king is not only the person who inherits the throne, he is the one expected to preserve the crown when the present reign can no longer keep it steady. He knew that every argument, every tense silence, every private complaint could become part of the inheritance waiting for him. But when Louis was drawn into it, that burden changed. It stopped being history. It became fatherhood. Catherine arrived with a different fear. She was not thinking first about rank, ceremony, or the optics of the monarchy. She was thinking about George, Charlotte, and Louis, and how easily royal politics can reach into childhood when no one draws a firm line. The princess had learned that royal children are often expected to behave like symbols before they are allowed to behave like children. That truth had made her protective in a way some inside the palace never fully understood. Louis had done nothing cruel, nothing calculated. Nothing malicious. He had simply been young in a room full of adults who expected control. Camilla saw the same room and felt something very different. She felt distance. She felt the quiet loyalty that formed around Catherine without anyone needing to command it. The queen consort had spent years fighting for acceptance inside a family where belonging was measured through memory, bloodline, silence, and public endurance. Now she watched the younger royals naturally turn toward Catherine, and every small gesture seemed to move Camilla farther from the center. Her frustration had not started with Louis, but Louis became the place where it escaped. Charles understood too much and acted too late. He knew Camilla felt isolated. He knew Catherine had been hurt. He saw one woman fighting for respect and another fighting for her child. His hesitation wounded both sides. To Camilla, it felt like abandonment. To Catherine, it felt like proof that royal courtesy could not be trusted to protect her children. William saw that hesitation, and something inside him hardened. The prince was not merely angry at Camilla. He was shaken by the realization that Louis had been pulled into a struggle he never chose. Catherine felt the same thing, standing close to her son while the room still tried to pretend the damage could be contained. But the confrontation over Louis did not come from nowhere. It had been sparked by a quieter moment weeks earlier, during a ceremony designed to show unity, when one small decision exposed the fracture waiting beneath the surface. Weeks before Louis froze under Camilla's rebuke, another moment took place. It was quieter, but far more dangerous than anyone realized at the time. It happened during the Windsor Children's Charity reception, when Catherine gently adjusted the seating plan so Louis could stay closer to her after becoming overwhelmed. Camilla watched it unfold in front of senior aides. To most people, it looked like a mother helping her child. To Camilla, it looked like Catherine taking command of the room. Catherine noticed Louis changing before anyone else did. His movements became sharper. His focus slipped. The formal rhythm of the reception began to press down on him. The Windsor Children's Charity reception was a public royal event built around young families and charitable work. It was the kind of appearance where the monarchy presents care, stability, and compassion through careful staging. That is why the moment mattered. Children were not just present, they were part of the message. So when Catherine quietly asked for Louis to be seated near her, she believed she was preventing embarrassment before anyone could turn his discomfort into criticism. Camilla saw it differently. She had been given a central role that day, a placement meant to show her steady position beside Charles and her importance within the family. In royal settings, central placement is never random. It signals trust, status, and public approval. But Catherine's gentle request shifted the emotional focus. Guests looked toward the Wales family. Aides adjusted quickly. The room softened around Catherine, and Camilla felt the attention move away from her, as if someone had quietly taken something she had fought years to hold. William noticed Camilla's expression. He saw the tight mouth, the still posture, the small pause before she smiled again. Later, after the reception ended and the family moved away from the public eye, William asked Catherine whether anything had felt wrong. She shook her head and chose peace. She told him Louis had simply needed to be near her. She did not want another family tension. She did not want her son's small difficulty turned into a palace dispute. But William kept remembering Camilla's face, because some looks do not leave a room. They stay there, waiting. Camilla carried the hurt directly to Charles. In a private conversation later summarized in a written household account, she reportedly told the king that the children were being used to strengthen Catherine's image inside the monarchy. Charles dismissed it at first. He said Catherine had acted as any mother would. But he did not challenge the bitterness beneath Camilla's words, and silence gave that bitterness room to grow. After that day, resentment settled quietly. Camilla did not forget the reception. Catherine did not realize how deeply it had landed. William sensed danger, but had nothing concrete enough to confront. And Charles, trying to preserve peace, failed to see that peace without truth only postpones the explosion. So when Louis shifted nervously during the later family meeting, and Catherine reached for him again, Camilla did not see a child needing comfort. She saw the same defeat returning. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a child going still. Louis had been fidgeting beside Catherine when Camilla's voice cut across the room with enough sharpness to make everyone turn. Catherine's hand moved instantly to his shoulder. William watched his son's face fall. Then he watched his wife steady herself. That was the moment the future king stopped being diplomatic and became a father first. Louis had grown uncomfortable as the family discussion shifted from ordinary scheduling into a colder conversation about the children's public appearances. Those appearances mattered because royal children are often presented to the public as symbols of continuity, the living bridge from one generation of the monarchy to the next. William understood that pressure. Catherine understood it even more deeply because she saw what adults sometimes forgot. A child can smile for cameras and still feel the weight of being watched. Camilla's rebuke landed in front of Catherine, Charles, William, and 2 aides, which made it impossible to treat as private irritation. The queen consort spoke as though she were defending discipline, but her words carried the edge of old resentment. Catherine whispered Louis' name and pulled him closer. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her disbelief sat in the room like a warning, and Camilla saw it. The princess was no longer only hurt. She was assessing the damage. William spoke next, and his voice was so low that it unsettled the room more than shouting would have. He told Camilla the monarchy would not be strengthened by humiliating a child. He said the crown was meant to protect the young, not shape them through fear. Camilla stiffened. She argued that children raised inside the royal family had to learn restraint early, because the public would never be gentle with them. William cut through that defense with one cold reply. Then they should find gentleness at home. Charles tried to intervene. He said William's name carefully, as if the word itself might pull his son back from the edge. But the king paused before defending Louis, and that pause caused more damage than any argument. William saw it. Catherine saw it. Even Camilla understood that the silence had exposed the weakness in the room. The monarch wanted peace, but peace without protection now looked like surrender. Catherine held Louis close as the tension sharpened. The boy said nothing, and that silence became the strongest accusation in the room. William looked at his father, then at Camilla. The decision was already written across his face. He would not debate his child's dignity as though it were a matter of palace policy. William walked Catherine and Louis out of the room without asking permission. He did not turn back. The door closed behind the Wales family, but the sound did not end the conflict. It began the machinery of power that would decide who still had authority inside the palace. After the confrontation, the palace did what it always does. It tried to contain the blast. Doors closed. Phones went quiet. Aides stopped speaking openly in corridors. But behind the silence was a harder truth. This was no longer only about Louis. It was about who had the right to shape the next generation, who could speak inside the family without being challenged, and who William would no longer allow near his children without limits. Senior aides moved quickly because the damage had crossed from family emotion into palace control. The households were separated almost immediately, with Camilla's staff kept away from the Wales team while Charles reviewed what had happened. A royal household is the private office that manages a royal figure's duties, messages, staff, schedule, and access. And inside the palace, access is power. Whoever controls the schedule controls the room. Whoever controls the room can shape the future of the family. William made his position clear through a private aide before anyone could soften the message. George, Charlotte, and Louis would no longer be placed in Camilla's presence without Catherine's approval. The prince did not send it as a threat. He sent it as a boundary. Catherine had carried Louis out of that room with steady hands and a wounded heart. William knew the next incident would not be treated as a misunderstanding. It would be treated as a choice. Charles sat alone with the briefing note. He placed it flat on his desk and stopped before the final paragraph because the earlier lines had already told him what he feared. The king understood this was not only about one painful sentence spoken to a child. It was about whether his reign could hold together a family that no longer trusted silence. He loved Camilla. He loved his grandson, and for once, those loyalties did not stand beside each other. They stood against each other. Camilla felt the walls closing in. She had survived cold rooms before, but this felt different because Catherine's pain now carried more authority than Camilla's title. The queen consort felt it in every delayed response, every avoided conversation, every careful glance from staff who once moved quickly to protect her comfort. William's anger had wounded her pride. But Catherine's quiet grief had done something worse. It made Camilla look powerful and small at the same time. A palace secretary warned Charles in an internal briefing that if the confrontation became public, sympathy would not move toward rank, it would move toward Louis and the mother who shielded him. That warning changed everything. The king could not protect Camilla by pretending the wound did not exist. He could only decide how much truth he was willing to face before the palace was forced to face it for him. William demanded a written boundary, no correction, criticism, or direct reprimand of his children by Camilla, unless either parent was present and had agreed to it. Charles read the demand once. Then he read it again. He knew the choice before him was brutal. Protect his wife from humiliation, or protect his grandson from another wound. That choice could not remain hidden for long. By the next morning, the first consequences began to fall, and Camilla discovered that palace silence can be colder than public condemnation. Morning came without ceremony, no announcement, no official punishment, no dramatic statement outside the palace gates. Yet inside the royal household, everyone understood the ground had shifted. Camilla's schedule changed first, then her access changed, then the tone of every conversation around her changed. She did not need a public reprimand to understand what had happened. The doors still opened, but not the same doors, and never with the same warmth. Camilla received the revised schedule before breakfast. Her expression hardened before her hands went still. Her name had been removed from a planned family-centered appearance involving the Wales children, and the explanation had been reduced to 4 careful words: revised household arrangements. That phrase mattered because palace schedules are not merely calendars. They decide who appears beside whom, who is trusted, and who is quietly moved away from the center of the family. The queen consort understood that language. She had lived around it long enough to recognize when softness was being used as a blade. Catherine chose the opposite of spectacle. She kept Louis away from formal family discussions for the rest of the day and gave him routine instead of royal tension. The princess did not announce her hurt. She did not turn anger into a weapon. She made breakfast ordinary. She kept her voice calm. She allowed her son to feel safe again. That mattered because children remember the feeling of a room before they understand the politics inside it. Catherine knew Louis needed calm more than explanations. William went to see him before breakfast, and the small moment struck harder than any briefing. Louis was unusually quiet, not loudly frightened, not dramatic, just careful. The prince sat with him, asked one simple question, and felt his resolve deepen when his son answered softly. William had faced pressure from the public, the press, and the palace itself. But nothing felt heavier than seeing a child monitor his own behavior because an adult had made him feel wrong. Charles summoned William privately later that morning. He did not call him in to scold him. The king wanted to know whether the damage could be repaired without a public fracture. A public fracture means a private royal conflict becoming visible enough to damage the family's image. Charles feared that more than anyone. He knew the monarchy survived by appearing steady, but he also knew steadiness meant little if the family inside it was breaking. William answered without raising his voice. Repair could begin only when Camilla acknowledged the harm directly to Catherine and Louis. The prince did not ask for humiliation. He asked for truth. Charles heard the difference, and it troubled him because truth would cost someone pride. Camilla sat alone after receiving the revised schedule, staring at the empty space where her name had been. Anger slowly turned into humiliation. For the first time, she understood that access had become conditional, and Catherine's silence had become stronger than any speech. The demand for an apology pushed everyone toward the one meeting they had all avoided. Camilla and Catherine face to face, without the protection of titles. And when that private meeting finally happened, the grand machinery of the monarchy disappeared, leaving only 2 women, one wounded child in the shadow of memory, and a truth neither could escape. There were no aides in the room this time. No secretaries. No prepared statement waiting to be read. Catherine stood by the window, composed but pale, while Camilla entered with the stiff pride of someone who had practiced every word and trusted none of them. William stayed outside the door, far enough to hear nothing, close enough to act if needed. For the first time since the confrontation, the crown had no voice. Only motherhood did. Catherine chose that meeting, and that choice mattered. William had not forced her into it. Charles had agreed not to attend because even the king understood that his presence would turn pain into performance. A private sitting room, in palace language, is a smaller family space used for quiet conversations away from formal reception rooms. This one became the place where rank could no longer hide the wound. Camilla entered as the queen consort. Catherine did not receive her as a title. She received her as Louis's mother. Camilla tried to begin with control. She said the moment had been misunderstood. She said her intention had been discipline. She said royal children needed guidance before the world judged them more harshly. The words sounded rehearsed. They did not sound healed. Catherine listened without interrupting. Then the princess said Louis might not remember every word, but he would remember being made to feel small in a room full of adults. That sentence struck harder than anger. Camilla looked away, and for the first time, her defense began to lose its shape. Catherine did not stop there. She told Camilla that Louis had asked whether he had embarrassed the family. Those words changed the room. The queen consort had entered prepared to protect her pride, but she had not prepared herself to hear that a child had carried shame away from the confrontation. Her voice faltered. She tried to answer, then stopped, because there was no royal language gentle enough to cover what had happened. Camilla finally admitted the truth. In a private recorded conversation, later summarized in a confidential household account, she acknowledged that her anger had not truly been about Louis. It had been about feeling erased whenever Catherine's bond with the children became the emotional center of the family. She said it quietly, almost bitterly, but she said it, and once the truth had been spoken, it could not be returned to silence. Catherine accepted the apology, but she did not offer easy forgiveness. She made it clear that trust was not restored simply because regret had entered the room. Louis would be protected. George and Charlotte would be protected. William would know everything that had been said. Camilla nodded. The nod carried defeat, but also the first sign of understanding. Catherine opened the door at last. William saw her expression and knew the meeting had not broken her. But it had changed something permanently. The family had survived the conversation, but the monarchy would not survive it unchanged. The private wound had found words. But outside the palace walls, the public was about to receive its own version of the story, and the reaction would be impossible to control. By the time the story reached the public, it had already escaped palace control. The details were incomplete, but the emotional image was devastating. A young prince frozen under an adult rebuke, Catherine moving to protect him, William reaching his breaking point because fatherhood outranked protocol. Britain did not need every sentence from the room. It understood the picture, and once the public chose its side, the palace could only respond. The Sunday front page landed like a verdict. Before the palace had finished preparing its response, one headline stood above the rest. A line crossed. Beneath it was a photograph of William holding Louis's hand outside a chapel days earlier, and that image became impossible to separate from the story now spreading across the country. A chapel in royal life is not only a place of prayer, it is often where the family appears united before tradition, faith, and history. That made the photograph hurt more. The public saw a father guiding his child, and suddenly the palace argument felt personal. Broadcasters did not treat the incident as ordinary royal gossip. They framed it as a family crisis about parenting, boundaries, and the emotional future of the monarchy. That mattered because public trust no longer rests only on crowns, carriages, uniforms, and formal statements. It rests on whether people believe the family inside the institution still understands human feeling. Catherine became the image of protection. William became the father who had finally said no. Louis became the child whose silence told the public more than any palace source could. A quiet crowd gathered outside Kensington Palace. Some brought flowers, some brought handwritten cards. No one shouted, no one needed to. One card placed near the gates, and later quoted in an evening broadcast read, "A child is not a symbol." That sentence cut through everything. It captured what millions felt, but could not easily say. Children born near the crown may belong to history, but they belong first to their parents. Charles received the public reaction with a heavy expression. Palace advisors warned him that defending Camilla too strongly would make the institution appear colder than the family it claimed to represent. The king understood the danger. If he protected the queen consort without acknowledging the hurt around Louis, he would seem loyal to rank over childhood. But if he moved too far away from Camilla, he would reveal a private fracture no palace wall could hide. William refused to issue a sentimental public statement. The prince would not turn his son's pain into performance. Instead, he allowed one careful palace line to stand. The well-being of the children remains the family's highest priority. It sounded simple, but inside the monarchy, it landed with force. The words were not only reassurance, they were a boundary. Camilla heard the statement and understood its meaning. Catherine heard it and knew William had protected their family without using Louis as a shield. Charles heard it and realized the Wales household had set a new emotional law. And with the world watching, the final judgment was no longer about whether Camilla had intended harm. It was about what the moment revealed when love, power, pride, and protection collided. In the end, the monarchy did not fall because of one confrontation, but it changed because of one child's silence, one mother's protective hand, one father's breaking point, and one queen consort's painful misjudgment. The incident exposed a truth the palace could no longer hide. The future of the crown would not be protected by cold hierarchy. It would be protected by the people willing to defend the vulnerable, even inside their own family. Charles made the final decision privately, and everyone in the room understood its weight before he finished speaking. Camilla would remain within the royal structure, but her informal authority around the Wales children would be permanently limited. Charles looked at her with sadness, not because he had stopped caring, but because he knew care was no longer enough to erase consequence. Catherine found peace somewhere else. She did not need revenge. She did not need a public victory. The princess found what she needed when Louis laughed again freely, without checking the room first. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.